In the glittering underbelly of New York's elite society, where fortunes are made and broken in the span of a cocktail party, whispers of scandal often echo louder than the truth, but none quite like the tale of Alexander Voss, a dashing 29-year-old entrepreneur whose charm could disarm a room full of skeptics, and Eleanor Hargrove, the enigmatic 80-year-old widow whose vast empire of real estate and antique treasures made her one of the city's untouchable icons. Their union wasn't born of fairy tales or fleeting passions. It was a calculated dance with destiny, one that began with greed and spiraled into something far more profound. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical love story. It's a roller coaster of deception, heartbreak, and unexpected redemption that will leave you questioning the price of true happiness. Alexander had always been a man of ambition, his sharp blue eyes scanning every opportunity like a predator in the wild. Born into modest means in a sleepy Midwestern town, he clawed his way to the Big Apple with nothing but a suitcase of dreams and a knack for turning heads. By 25, he built a fledgling tech startup, but the venture capital dried up faster than summer rain on hot pavement. Debts piled high, and desperation set in. That's when he first laid eyes on Eleanor at charity Gala, her silver hair styled in elegant waves, diamonds dripping from her neck like stars fallen to earth. She was worth billions, heir to a family fortune that spanned generations of shrewd investments. To Alexander, she wasn't just a woman. She was a lifeline. Their courtship was a whirlwind of calculated romance. Alexander wooed her with midnight strolls through Central Park, reciting poetry from her favorite Victorian authors, and surprising her with rare blooms from exotic greenhouses. Eleanor, long widowed and starved for companionship after decades of isolation in her sprawling penthouse, fell under his spell. Her friend warned her, "He's too young, too hungry." But loneliness has a way of blinding even the wisest souls. Within months, they were married in a lavish ceremony at her Hamptons estate, the tabloids buzzing with headlines like May December Miracle and Fortune's Fickle Bride. Alexander smiled for the cameras, his hand possessively on her frail arm, but in his mind, he was already counting the zeros in her bank accounts. Life in Eleanor's world was a gilded cage for Alexander. The penthouse overlooked the Hudson, filled with priceless art and echoes of a bygone era. He played the devoted husband by day, escorting her to operas, managing her charities, but by night he schemed. He siphoned funds into his failing business, justifying as investments for our future. Eleanor, sharp as ever despite her age, began to notice the discrepancies. A missing necklace here, an unauthorized transfer there. Yet she said nothing at first, her heart clinging to the illusion of love, until one fateful evening, when she overheard him on the phone with his lawyer, laughing about how he'd secured the bag and planned to file for divorce once the prenup's clauses kicked in. Tears streamed down Eleanor's wrinkled cheeks as she confronted him in their opulent library, surrounded by leather-bound tomes that had witnessed countless secrets. Was it all a lie, Alexander? Did you ever see me, or just my money? Her voice trembled, a mix of fury and fragility that pierced even his callous heart. He froze, the weight of his actions crashing down like a chandelier. For the first time, he saw not the wealthy widow, but a woman who had loved fiercely, lost deeply, and dared to hope again. But instead of remorse, his defenses rose. "You knew what this was," he snapped, his words sharp as daggers. "Everyone plays a game in this city." She crumpled into a chair, sobbing quietly, her cries echoing through the empty halls. That night changed everything. Alexander stormed out, seeking solace in the neon lights of downtown bars, but guilt gnawed at him like a persistent shadow. He replayed her tears in his mind, realizing that in pursuing wealth, he'd overlooked the real treasure. Eleanor's stories of a life richly lived, her wisdom that could have guided his ambitions towards something genuine. Days turned into weeks of tense silence in the penthouse. Eleanor, ever the strategist, began quietly unraveling his financial ties, but not out of spite, out of a desire to teach him a lesson he desperately needed. One afternoon, she called him into her study, where a stack of documents awaited. "Sit down, Alexander. It's time we rewrite the story." As he hesitated in the doorway, Eleanor's eyes, still red-rimmed from sleepless nights, met his with a spark of determination. She handed him a folder labeled Our Legacy, Inside, which were not divorce papers, but blueprints for a joint venture, a foundation blending his tech savvy with her philanthropic vision to aid underprivileged youth. "I married you for love," she said softly, "but perhaps you can learn to love for more than money." Alexander's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, a flicker of something new stirring within him. Regret, maybe, or the first seeds of true affection. But just as he opened his mouth to respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was her longtime attorney, bearing news that would upend everything they thought they knew about each other. The attorney, a silver-haired man named Reginald Pierce, who had served the Hargrove family for over 4 decades, stepped into the study with a leather briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. His face was etched with the kind of solemnity reserved for funerals or boardroom coups. Eleanor straightened in her high-backed chair, her fragile frame suddenly radiating the authority of someone who had navigated countless crises. Alexander remained standing, the folder still open in his hands, his pulse quickening as he sensed the air thicken with impending revelation. "Mrs. Voss," Reginald began, addressing her formally as always, even after marriage, "I apologize for the intrusion, but this cannot wait. I've spent the last week verifying the documents you asked me to examine." He placed a briefcase on the mahogany desk and clicked it open, withdrawing a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "These arrived from Geneva this morning. They concern the offshore trust established by your late husband." Eleanor's expression remained composed, but Alexander caught the faintest flicker in her eyes, something between anticipation and dread. She nodded for Reginald to continue. Reginald glanced briefly at Alexander, as if weighing whether the younger man should remain in the room. Eleanor answered the unspoken question with a subtle gesture of her hand. "He stays. Whatever this is, we face it together." The attorney cleared his throat. "Very well. 25 years ago, Mr. Hargrove created a series of blind trusts in Switzerland. Their purpose was to protect certain assets from potential litigation after a rather aggressive acquisition spree in the 80s. The beneficiaries would be revealed only upon your 80th birthday or in the event of your remarriage, whichever came first." He paused, letting the weight settle. "You remarried 6 months ago, Eleanor. That triggered the disclosure clause." Alexander felt the room tilt slightly. He had spent months mapping every corner of Eleanor's visible fortune. The penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the art collection, the domestic accounts. But offshore blind trusts? Those were ghosts, invisible even to most diligent prenuptial investigators. His own lawyers had assured him there was nothing hidden of significance. Reginald broke the wax seal and slid out a single sheet of heavy cream paper. "The primary trust contains approximately $480 million in liquid assets, plus equity in several private companies. But that's not the part that concerns me most." He turned the page toward Eleanor. "There is a secondary clause. If you remarry, the trust passes not to you, but directly to your spouse, provided the marriage lasts at least 1 year, and there is no finding of fraud or coercion in a court of law." The silence that followed was so complete that Alexander could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She stared at the document as though it were written in a language she no longer understood. Reginald continued softly, "There's more. A codicil added 15 years ago, after your husband's passing. It states that should the new spouse attempt to divest or siphon assets from your primary estate prior to the 1-year anniversary, the entire trust reverts to a charitable foundation in perpetuity, and the spouse forfeits all claims to both the trust and your personal fortune." Alexander's knees weakened. Every unauthorized transfer he had made, every investment routed through shell accounts, every missing piece of jewelry sold quietly through a discreet auction house. It all flashed before him like evidence in a courtroom. He had been so careful, or so he thought. But Eleanor had noticed. She had always noticed. He looked at her now, expecting triumph or cold fury in her gaze. Instead, he found something far more devastating. Profound sadness. She reached across the desk and took the document from Reginald's hand, her fingers trembling. "So this is why he insisted on that strange clause all those years ago," she murmured, almost to herself. "He knew I would be vulnerable one day. He wanted to protect me, even from my own heart." Reginald nodded. Your late husband was a cautious man, madam, perhaps overly so, but he loved you fiercely. Alexander found his voice at last, hoarse and cracking. Eleanor, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of this. It sounded pathetic even to his own ears, because while he hadn't known about the trust, his motives had been rotten from the start. She lifted her eyes to his, and for the first time since the night she had cried, there was no accusation in them, only exhaustion. No, you didn't know, but you didn't need to. You saw an old woman with money and decided that was enough. She folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Reginald, leave us, please. I need to speak with my husband alone. The attorney bowed slightly and withdrew, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft click. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with centuries of accumulated wealth and regret. Eleanor rose slowly, steadying herself on the arm of her chair, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Snow had begun to fall, fat silent flakes drifting past the glass like forgotten promises. Alexander remained rooted to the spot, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Do you know what the worst part is, Alexander? She asked without turning around. It isn't the money. It isn't even the betrayal. It's that for a few brief months, I allowed myself to believe I was loved again. Truly loved. I woke up excited to see your face. I wore colors again instead of black. I laughed at your ridiculous jokes. Her voice wavered, and every moment of that joy was built on your contempt. He took a tentative step forward. Eleanor, Don't, she interrupted gently. Don't offer excuses now. They'll only make it worse. She turned to face him at last. But I'm not going to throw you to the wolves either. I'm too old for vengeance. It exhausts me. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying we have 6 months until the 1-year anniversary. 6 months for you to decide who you actually are. She returned to the desk and picked up the folder she had shown him earlier, the one with the joint foundation plans. This project, it was never a trick. I meant every word. If you stay, if you work beside me without touching another cent that isn't earned through honest labor, if you prove that you can value something beyond money, then when the year is up, the trust becomes yours to share in building something meaningful, not to squander. He stared at her, stunned. And if I leave? Then you leave with what you brought into this marriage. Your debts, your pride, and whatever conscience you have left. The prenup stands. My personal fortune remains mine. The trust goes to charity. And I will never speak your name again. The choice hung between them like a blade. Alexander's mind raced through calculations. Lawyers he could hire, loopholes he might exploit, the humiliation of starting over broke at 29. But beneath the greed, something else stirred. The memory of Eleanor's hand in his during quiet dinners, the way she listened when he spoke of his childhood dreams, the stories she told of building the empire from nothing alongside her husband. Moments he had dismissed as mere performance were, for her, genuine fragments of a life reawakened. He sank into the chair opposite her desk. I don't know if I'm capable of being the man you deserve, he admitted, the words tasting foreign and bitter. Neither do I, she replied honestly. But I'm willing to find out, if you are. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the city in hush. Inside, the two of them sat in silence for a long while, the weight of possibilities settling around them like the falling flakes. In the weeks that followed, Alexander moved out of the master bedroom into a guest suite down the hall, a symbolic distance that felt both punishing and merciful. He began working 12-hour days on the foundation plans, meeting with nonprofit leaders, learning grant protocols, drafting tech solutions for tracking aid distribution. Eleanor watched from a distance at first, wary of hope, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, patterns emerged. He arrived early, stayed late, asked questions that revealed genuine curiosity rather than opportunism. One evening in early spring, he found her in the conservatory surrounded by orchids she had nurtured for decades. He carried a tablet displaying mock-ups for an app that would connect donors directly with students in underserved communities. His eyes were bright with exhaustion and something that looked suspiciously like passion. I think we can launch the pilot in Brooklyn by fall, he said, hesitating at the threshold, if you approve the budget. She studied him over the rim of her teacup. The sharp angles of his face had softened slightly. Sleepless nights had left faint shadows under his eyes, but they were the shadows of effort, not scheming. "Show me," she said. They spent hours poring over the designs, debating features, laughing unexpectedly at a clumsy user interface joke. When the grandfather clock struck midnight, Alexander realized he had forgotten to check his personal accounts all day, an unprecedented lapse. As the months wore on, the city thawed and bloomed. Alexander's old circle of nightlife friends drifted away, unable to comprehend his new rhythm of board meetings and site visits to community centers. Rumors swirled in society pages about the Ice Age and the Voss marriage, but neither he nor Eleanor cared to correct them. On the eve of their one-year anniversary, Alexander stood in the library where everything had unraveled, holding a small velvet box. Inside was not a diamond or extravagant gem, but a simple gold band engraved with coordinates. The exact spot in Central Park where they had shared their first walk. He found Eleanor in her study, reviewing final trust documents with Reginald. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly when Reginald had once again withdrawn. "I know I haven't earned that yet, but I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow with the trust, I'm staying. Not for the money, for the work, for us, if you'll still have me." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the familiar glint of calculation. It wasn't there. In its place was raw vulnerability, the kind that terrified men like the one he used to be. She reached out and took the ring, turning it in the lamplight. "1 year ago, I cried in this house because I thought I'd been a fool," she said. "Tonight, I'm not crying. That's progress, I suppose." Alexander smiled faintly, unsure whether to hope. "But," she continued, slipping the ring onto her right hand rather than replacing her wedding band, "we have many more years to see if you can make me laugh often enough to forget the tears." Just then, her phone buzzed on the desk, an urgent message from the Foundation's new executive director. A major corporate donor had pulled out at the last minute, threatening the entire Brooklyn pilot program. Crisis loomed on the very night. Everything else hung in balance. Eleanor looked at Alexander, a spark of challenge in her eyes. "Well, husband, shall we save our legacy together?" He rolled up his sleeves without hesitation, already reaching for his laptop. As they dove into emergency calls and creative fundraising strategies deep into the night, something shifted irrevocably between them. Not perfect trust, not yet, but the promising foundation of partnership forged in fire. And outside, dawn approached over Manhattan, painting the skyline in hues of rose and gold, as if the city itself held its breath for whatever came next in their improbable story. The first light of their anniversary morning crept over the Manhattan skyline, like a quiet benediction, turning the East River into molten gold. Alexander and Eleanor had not slept. Spread across the study table were laptops, scribbled notepads, and empty coffee cups, evidence of a night spent battling the donor crisis. Through sheer will, creative pledges, and Alexander's relentless outreach to tech moguls he once partied with, they had secured a last-minute matching grant that not only saved the Brooklyn pilot, but doubled its scope. At 5:47 a.m., the final confirmation email arrived. They looked at each other across the clutter, exhausted, disheveled, and, for the first time, truly together. Eleanor's hand found his, her skin paper-thin, but warm. 1 year, she whispered. "We made it." Alexander brought her fingers to his lips, a gesture no longer calculated but instinctive. "We're just beginning." Downstairs, Reginald waited with the trust documents already notarized and ready. The clock struck 9, and with a pen that had signed empires into existence, Eleanor transferred the offshore fortune not solely to Alexander, but to an irrevocable joint trust dedicated exclusively to the foundation they had built from the ashes of their mistakes. $480 million, once a weapon of temptation, became the lifeblood of scholarships, coding boot camps and mentorship programs stretching from New York to Nairobi. Alexander signed beside her name without hesitation, his hand steady, his eyes clear. The tabloids, hungry for scandal, received an invitation instead. That evening, beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Club, Alexander and Eleanor hosted a gala unlike any the city had seen. No stuffy speeches or silent auctions, just young scholarship recipients taking the stage to demo apps they had built, former foster kids sharing poetry, and a string quartet made up entirely of foundation graduates. Cameras flashed, but the headlines the next day were not about age or money. They read, "From heartbreak to hope, the Voss Foundation changes lives, and the marriage that healed a city." In the midst of the celebration, Alexander led Eleanor to the center of the ballroom floor. The orchestra struck up a slow waltz. Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece that had played during their first dance as husband and wife, when everything between them was still performance. This time, as he guided her in gentle circles, there was no audience to impress, only truth to honor. He leaned close to her ear. "I was a thief," he said softly, so only she could hear. "I came to steal your fortune. Instead, you stole my emptiness and filled it with purpose. I will spend the rest of my life thanking you for that miracle." Eleanor's eyes glistened, but her smile was radiant, the kind that erased decades in an instant. "And I was a lonely old woman who thought love had passed her by forever. You gave me a reason to wake up excited again, not for youth, but for tomorrow. We saved each other, Alexander. That's the real fortune." As the music swelled, guests formed a circle around them, phones raised, capturing the moment that would go viral. The elegant octogenarian in midnight blue silk, and a handsome young man who looked at her as if she were the only star in the sky. Millions watched the clip in the days that followed, leaving comments filled with tears and emojis, proof that even in a cynical world, redemption still has the power to move hearts. Years unfolded like pages in a book neither had dared to imagine writing. The foundation grew into a global force, lifting thousands out of poverty and into possibility. Alexander's tech innovation streamlined aid delivery worldwide, earning him awards he accepted only if Eleanor stood beside him. They traveled, not to private islands or exclusive retreats, but to villages where children now attended schools bearing their names. In photographs from those trips, Eleanor's silver hair caught the sun, and Alexander's arm was always around her, protective, proud, tender. Time, relentless as ever, began to slow Eleanor's steps. Yet even as her body weakened, her spirit burned brighter. On quiet evenings in the penthouse conservatory, surrounded by orchids that bloomed more vibrantly than ever, she would rest her head against his shoulder while he read aloud from the letters they received, grateful notes from students who had become doctors, engineers, artists. Each one was a testament that their pain had birthed beauty. One spring afternoon, beneath the same cherry blossoms in Central Park where their story had truly begun, Alexander pushed her wheelchair along the familiar path. The trees were in full, extravagant bloom, petals drifting like soft pink snow. He stopped at the exact bench where he had once recited poetry for effect, now reciting it from memory because the words lived in his heart. When he finished, Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and drew out the simple gold band he had given her on their first anniversary, the one engraved with these coordinates. She pressed it into his palm. "I want you to keep this close when I'm gone," she said, her voice steady despite the fragility of her frame. Not as a reminder of mistakes, but of mercy, of second chances, of the astonishing things love can build when it refuses to quit. Alexander's throat tightened. "You're not going anywhere yet." She smiled, that wise, luminous smile that had first cracked his armor. "I've already gone everywhere I dreamed of, because of you." That night, in the quiet of their bedroom overlooking the city lights, Eleanor slipped away peacefully in her sleep, her hand still clasped in his. Alexander did not weep in despair. He wept in gratitude for the impossible gift of having been loved by her and for the man she had helped him become. The funeral was not a mournful affair, but a celebration of life attended by thousands, world leaders, philanthropists, and most importantly, the young people whose futures she had reshaped. Alexander spoke last, his voice strong and unbroken. "Eleanor Hargrove Voss taught me that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you lift, the hearts you heal, and the love you leave behind." She took a greedy, lost boy and showed him how to become a man worthy of her. Every child who now dares to dream, because of our foundation, is her living legacy. And every morning I wake up determined to make her proud is proof that love, true, fierce, redemptive love, never dies. In the years that followed, Alexander never remarried. The penthouse remained filled with orchids, The foundation expanded beyond imagining, and every spring he returned to that Central Park bench, placing a single rare bloom upon it. Strangers often found him there, head bowed, smiling through tears, and more than one young couple, inspired by the viral story that had touched the world, asked to take photographs nearby, believing the spot carried magic. Because it did. The tale of the 29-year-old who married an 80-year-old for money made her cry, and then spent a lifetime turning those tears into rivers of hope became legend. A reminder whispered across generations that no heart is beyond redemption, no mistake beyond repair, and no love, no matter how improbable, beyond the power to change the world. And somewhere, in the gentle rustle of cherry blossoms or the laughter of a child receiving their first scholarship, Eleanor's spirit danced on, forever young, forever loved, forever victorious.